Started. Welcome everyone to the April 2025 GUAC community meeting. As a reminder, this meeting is recorded and will be posted to the GUAC YouTube channel. This is an OpenSSF meeting subject to the Code of Conduct and the Linux Foundation antitrust policy. I don't see any new names on the list, but if anyone wants to reintroduce themselves just for fun, now's a good time to do that. All right. So the first item on the agenda is just an announcement of contributor ladder climbs. Some guy named Ben Cotton was promoted to reviewer on GUAC Visualizer. He sounds like trouble, but I'm sure the maintainers know what they're doing. We don't have any other contributor ladder climbs this time, but
Ben brings a
yeah.
good trouble in.
Alrighty. So up next, we've had one release since our last meeting, the 0.14.0 release, and the main part of that was a Cubescape collector that Jeff Mendoza worked on. He and Ben Hirschberg gave a talk on that at KubeCon in London a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if that video is live yet, but if it is, I'll make sure it gets into the meeting notes. If not, I'll add it later. But Jeff, do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll show it off a little bit. I'll try to be quick. I'll try to share. Can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, so it's basically here under GUAC 1 collect, or it's also under GUAC collect as well, Cubescape. And so it needs to connect to the API server and get the Cubescape objects. I'll show those off a little bit later. And then it can poll or not poll. So if you set it to poll, it actually ignores the poll interval because it doesn't watch on the API server. The way you run it is like this. I've actually already run it, so I'm not going to run it. This I just used a kube control run here, but I pointed it to the GUAC 0.14.0 image and then ran GUAC 1 collect Cubescape. And I'm actually running GUAC outside of the cluster, so that's why I'm using that 1089.01 address. And then I was pulling down the filtered SBOMs. So what are the filtered SBOMs? If we look at the custom resources that Cubescape adds to Kubernetes, you'll see two here, SBOM sifts and SBOM sift filtereds. So SBOM sift would be all of the SBOMs for all the images that Cubescape sees running in the cluster. So if I get those, you can see I have 3 SBOMs here because if I do get pod, I have 3 pods running. So it'll keep this up to date with what you have running. Then same thing for the filtered. We have these, and so I'll show the difference of those in GUAC in a minute. But it does other things like OpenVex containers. So that's something I want to add to the collector as well, to put the vex statements into GUAC. It'll give you like the vulnerabilities of what's running. Those are also added as custom resources. It does a bunch of other things, but this is the stuff that I integrated with. Yeah, let me show the GraphQL playground real quick.
Do you know where it's getting the back segments from?
Say what?
You said that they have a back statement container.
Yeah.
How's that vex? Is that kind of just propagated from somewhere, or they're kind of doing some analysis and
Well, let me cover the SBOMs real quick first.
Okay.
So if I query for all SBOMs, I see that I have some file collector ones. I'll ignore those. So the Kubescape collector ones are here. So this one here is a regular one. So if I run that, and just get the packages for it, I see like a bunch of Debian stuff. It's quite long, right? So back to all SBOMs. And I need to scroll through and find one that's a filtered SBOM. Maybe I think I did them second, so they're at the end. Yeah, so this replica set one is a filtered SBOM. So if I get the contents of this SBOM, you'll see it's quite short actually. It's a lot shorter than the other one. And so basically what Kubescape is doing for the filtered SBOM is they have a daemon set on all of the nodes in the cluster, and it's running an eBPF monitor to see what binaries and libraries are getting loaded in each container. And so if you have a bunch of files in your container that show up in the SBOM, but Kubescape doesn't see them being loaded, then Kubescape will remove those from the SBOM. So the filtered SBOM contains only the things that Kubescape sees being loaded into memory. So it's basically if you see a vulnerability on a package in the image SBOM but not in the filtered SBOM, then that's something that's not actually being run at runtime. It's just a file in the container. So the vex statements are the other way around. So it'll be if it finds something in the SBOM, but it's not being run, it'll create a vex statement and put it there, and say that hey, our eBPF monitor is not seeing this component being run. There's a vulnerability in its component, so it puts a vex statement in there. I haven't looked into them to validate that and figure out how they work, but that's the gist of it. So yeah, the filtered SBOMs are pretty sweet and pretty cool that we can watch those and pull those into GUAC automatically. That's it.
A quick question about the SBOMs. Do the SBOMs point to the hash of the container image, or how's that keyed? Or at least the ones being produced by Kubescape?
Look at them. So, oh, I didn't put the I didn't put the subject here. The subject is typically an artifact, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it's fine. I can go check it out offline.
yeah, I think I could do something like this. But again, I think the subject's on artifact, so I have to get the
Yeah.
artifact and then. But yeah, the SBOMs, the image SBOMs are generated by SIFT, so it's pretty much whatever SIFT is doing. It's just keeping like the CRDs up to date with what is currently running and what's not currently running, and they're all there.
Gotcha.
Then the same thing with the filtered ones, which is generated by SIFT, but then they're filtered. One thing I do notice is that like the origin here changes. So like this one is an image SBOM, so it's just like the Docker.io /namespace/name and then this short hash. Whereas the filtered SBOMs they're not just the image. They start with either pod or replica set to show kind of like what the thing is being run. Ben?
Yeah, this is maybe more of an eBPF question than anything else, but is it kind of based on what's currently in memory, or is there some sort of like, well, this was loaded into memory recently, so we're still gonna count that as
It's got some time settings where it watches for a certain period of time. And
okay.
then so if something like gets dynamically loaded due to some user interaction that doesn't happen all the time, if it's not seen during that time window, there could be you know, less fidelity there.
So if Kubescape produces a vex statement because something's not loaded into memory, and then later on it is loaded into memory, does it invalidate that vex statement or like update it to?
Good question. I don't know the internal
Okay.
workings that well. I think it just looks for a period of time and then it stops looking, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I remember that call we had, Jeff, with Ben. I think that's the behavior, if I recall correctly.
All right. Any other questions for Jeff on this?
This is super cool. Were there any interesting remarks or questions about this at KubeCon?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people, they're happy to see the integrations and stuff like that, but a lot of questions on how the Kubescape stuff works.
Gotcha. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, up next is a topic that has been talked about off and on some, but seems like is getting very close to being reality, is a 1.0 release. And I will link, as soon as I find the right tab, the notes from the maintainers meeting. Or there you go. So, Brandon, do you want to
Yeah.
talk through this?
Yeah, I'll talk through this. As Ben said, we've been discussing this for a while. Been trying to figure out like kind of take an inventory of what we think is stable, kind of figure out what's a good way forward. And after I think months of back and forth, I think we've kind of settled on pretty much what a list of things for 1.0 that we feel are pretty stable. We've gone through multiple iterations, multiple use, and things seem to settle pretty well. Um, so the overall 1.0 is really about looking at the components, the critical components, especially the ingestion pipeline of GUAC, and kind of creating and showing the stability around that. Um, we've used GUAC with fairly large data sets. One that Kusari is running runs with over 60,000 S bombs and growing. But overall, yeah, the overall stability, GraphQL API is pretty stable now. We're creating stability for that. We're committing to stability of the end to back end. All the passes that we have are pretty stable, with the ingestion and so on. So the main idea is you should be able to run something, and um, for the most part, there shouldn't be anything that would change drastically or create any breaking changes. Um, we also have additional work that we did to deprecate the collect subscriber service, which basically was augmenting the data together with the certifiers as you ingested them in favor of doing this on ingestion time, because there was a request from a lot of folks where they're using it as a CLI. I'm importing a bunch of documents. I want vulnerability information or additional depths of depth or licensing information for Clearly Defined like immediately. So that's something that we've worked on for the past few months to get all of that into ingestion time, and that has been tested as well. And we have collector stability, mainly focusing on for file collectors, which we figured essentially you can do anything you want. That's it. We have a bunch of other collectors that are uh, have been developed, have been used, as you saw, Jeff's demo on Cubescape. Um, the only reason why we're saying these are not part 1.0 is just because um, these features seem to have either several they're not fully featured yet, or that they are dependent on other interfaces which are subject to change. So for the most part, these additional collectors are usable. Um, we don't we don't suspect them to be changing too much, but at the same time, if you want something really solid, file collector is the way to go. you can use the file collector on top of a lot of the existing collectors. In terms of API stability, GraphQL API is stable together with all its backends. The REST API that we developed is not 1.0 and it's not considered stable. And we have a few more things that we are still talking through: CLI stability and deployment stability. These are currently things that we have to get through a little bit more specification. And then we have a little bit on backward compatibility and versioning. The main aspect of this is that all minor versions will be backward compatible in terms of the GraphQL API. Major versions will mean that there is subject to behavioral change of the GraphQL APIs or any breaking changes of the GraphQL APIs. We suspect that there won't be many major changes given the stability of the GraphQL API as we've observed in the past half a year or so. So that would just be the consideration. Other than that, I talked about this previously. Collect subscriber stability. That's something that we are deprecating in favor of on ingestion and a longer term solution. So that will be deprecated. Other than that, I think that's about it. There's still a little bit that needs to be done on these notes, but hopefully we'll finalize it in the next maintainer meeting, and we should have something out fairly soon. Any questions?
All right, I don't hear any questions, so that's I guess that's encouraging. All right, the next topic on the agenda also comes from things that have been discussed in maintainers meeting recently, and this is around the idea of merging together some of the GUAC and trustification community. Brandon or Dejan, do you want to speak to that?
Brandon, do you want to do it?
After you.
Yep. So justification used in the first version, in the first iteration, GUAC as a core correlation engine. But we moved away from it in a rewrite, but still stayed close to the same domain and the same use cases. So we were trying to figure out the ways how we can work together in the future. And in general, we come to the conclusion that we can go in terms of making one community with 2 projects for starters, because we are trying to solve the problems in a similar area with a little bit of different aspects to it for now, and would try to in the future provide more ways for people to easily solve these problems, no matter how they are approaching the problem of the handling software supply chain security metadata, right? So yeah, that was discussed, and I think we are in a good shape to start building GUAC beyond GUAC project. So maybe calling it like a GUAC community for all this, where justification will join for starters, and then we'll figure out more things to do. So one of the first steps would be to try to find common grounds. Like we identified, we can work on tools for ingesting data, that they are interoperable between the first 2 projects for starters, defining some common metadata for or protocols that we can reuse, so that you can share data between the projects for starters, and then work towards more common goal to support different use cases. I think Mike is also here, and he has this vision of like providing a way for different use cases, like people who have like a one or couple of SBOMs to people that want to scan the whole world, and we should provide an easy way for everybody to do that. So try to start with these two projects merging together, define all the ontologies, protocols, schemas, tools around them to solve all this. So that's the idea.
Yeah, I think to that point, yeah, I think there's like a couple of different, from like very deep, very complicated analysis, which is like in the graph. And then there's like things of, hey, I just have some SBOMs and I just want to store them. I want to do some basic sort of analysis. And when I need to go to the graph, I can go to the graph. And then there's also probably even things like, what can we do, even if it is just a shell script around JQ and OSV, OSV scanner, like what are the things we can do with just like, I have 5 or 6 SBOMs. Because I know one of the biggest things that folks have brought up was like, I just have 2 or 3 SBOMs. I don't want to spin up a GUAC. I'm like, I agree. You shouldn't have to spin up a GUAC. And folks sometimes are, or like even just any server, a data, like a full-fledged database or anything like that. And it's like, oh, actually, as it turns out, there are a lot of things we can do on that front as well. But I think to your point, Dion, the big thing that has been brought up in the past was ensuring there is a consistent vocabulary, ontology, data model, whatever you want to call it, because then it just makes it easy that like, oh, scanning what, or rather, analyzing 1 SBOM, 2 SBOMs, 10 SBOMs, 100 SBOMs, or 10,000 SBOMs should all sort of follow similar semantics, which then just makes it easy, and then again, where like you just might have a different depth to the analysis. And obviously it's fine when you have 10,000 SBOMs for certain queries to maybe take a little while compared to I have like 1 or 2 SBOMs and I should be getting a result back in a few seconds.
Yeah, I think having that ontology or the data model so allows like, I think Mike and Adrian, like you said, like the interoperability, right? So like whether you're using justification, whether you're using GUAC, but also, you can write parsers in Rust, you can write parsers in Go, you can write parsers in any language you want, and it should all be interoperable. Yeah, I think in addition to that also, we did talk a little bit more about kind of the broader ecosystem of supply chain metadata usage, Semver parsing, Perl parsing, and all these things. And like, there's just so many things out there. Yes, and no shackle. And just having that community and to bring these projects together, have those discussions, making sure we have, solve the common problems across the space.
Yeah, definitely. And last week at VulnCon, was talking to a lot of folks from Red Hat about some of this stuff, and they were super enthusiastic about how we can combine the like GUAC world and the trustification world. And Vincent was happy, and lots of folks from Red Hat were happy. So I'm really enthusiastic to see this sort of come together.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, and again, I think this is not something that needs to be answered right now, but I would be interested to see where we kind of want to go with that unified data model, especially long term, because I think we have sort of said that obviously APIs, whatever it could be in GraphQL, whatever, but the actual sort of data model maybe makes more sense in something like a protobuf or JSON schema. Or, yes, I would sort of lean towards protobuf with in particular, there's a couple of extensions to protobuf that make it very easy to do additional, even if they're like tagged, additional constraints. Because one of the, I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole, but there's like certain things like one of the things one of the things that protobuf sort of describes is it describes the underlying native data types, when some folks might want to say, have some way of saying, this is a Perl. And how do I say that this is a Perl in protobuf validation is nice, but it's only validation for like string or int
Yeah.
or that sort of thing. But there are extensions to it that allow you to do stuff like, hey, here is something I'm tagging with like Perl, and then it's still up to like the actual code generator to say this is the Perl validator for that thing. But it makes certain other things a little bit easier because again, sometimes it's just knowing actually what you're giving me is a GUID and I should treat it like a GUID versus you gave me a string and I'm treating it like a string and I didn't realize that it's actually a GUID or whatever. So having some ability to tag that or label that, and there are a couple of protobuf extensions that do this, which make that really nice. And I wish I had known about that, like when we were doing some of this, when we were starting this like almost like 3 years ago.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we probably can look at is also like how do you introduce extensions to the data model, and I think we kind of created this like has metadata and predicate at some point. But I think now that we have almost a second chance at this, we can think more about building more native support for customization, so that we don't have to keep upgrading the API. I have a proper upgrade path to custom fields.
All right. Anything else on that topic? So I will say that the supply chain integrity working group, which we fall under in the OpenSSF, is aware of this. And the next step is basically going to be making sure the Linux Foundation legal team and the Red Hat legal team are handshake on any transfers of trademarks or anything like that that needs to happen. Just making sure that everything is good from their standpoint, and then we'll start putting together a plan for how we're going to make these sorts of things, like move the repos over. I think the general idea is probably that we'll create new areas in the existing contributor ladder that correspond to trustification areas, and move the existing trustification maintainers to the appropriate rungs on the contributor ladder for those areas. Obviously, there's still a lot of details to work out, but it does seem like everybody is in favor of this and in general agreement about what shape it should take, which always makes things easier. Before we close it out for the day, it wasn't on the agenda, but I was just wanted to give a chance. So, as we mentioned earlier, KubeCon was a few weeks ago in London. Several of us were there. I didn't know if anybody wanted to share thoughts. Mike wants to share thoughts. All right, go ahead, Mike.
So an interesting thing that and this is kind of start and stopped a few times, but CNCF plans to use or at least try out using GUAC to do supply chain analysis across all CNCF projects, because they have a problem with license and vulnerability management. And again, like license and vulnerability management is up to the individual project, but CNCF obviously wants to do general sort of like audits once in a while to say, from a license perspective, is this going to get the LF sued? They want to know if a particular license, if a particular project is not following a license, they're including something that's potentially an issue, whatever. They want to know so that they can work with those projects to fix it. And that sort of thing is like a very large issue, because again, it's like, oh, this project decided to rug pull, and all these CNCF projects all use that. We need to get them all in a room to kind of work through that. And then the same thing goes with vulnerabilities as well. Like vulnerabilities and dependencies are all the responsibility of the individual project, but the CNCF would like to be able to tell projects like, some sort of Go level, a log4j came out, right? Like, oh my gosh, there's a major vulnerability in some Go library that's used by, half of the CNCF projects. Maybe we should all coordinate together instead of having each individual project kind of do their own thing. Because again, each individual project can do their own thing, but getting everybody to come together and maybe work to fix it just makes stuff more efficient. And so, again, sort of the GUAC world of things is super, I think, interesting there. And I think probably over the next few months, they plan to kind of start looking at some of this stuff. And I'm working with them to kind of, I think ramp them up to some of this, which is, hey, do you need to spin something up right this second? What are you trying to do? Where are your SBOMs? Maybe let's first start working on the SBOM bit, and then as time goes on, we can look more at like the running the graph and everything else. And then potentially also including something like trustification and all that good stuff.
Mike, did you want to talk about the talk you did with Andy?
Sure, yeah. At a very high level, Andy and I, Andrew Martin from Control Plane, and I had a talk on where we had sort of Flux and GUAC. Very high level, just sort of, most of it was on Flux, but we were talking through stuff like, hey, we deployed something in Flux. There's a vulnerability. Here's where that vulnerability lives. It's very easy to, like, we didn't actually run the patch because, again, running all this stuff on the, conference Wi-Fi is a bit of a mess, but, super basic stuff. There seems to also be some pretty cool things we can maybe do over time, like hook, like GUAC as, again, like a policy data source, so that when you go to deploy, and I know we had shown off similar things with Argo CD in the past, but with Flux, like, hey, I want to deploy out this new Helm chart. Well, let's take a look at those images. Hey, there's some issues in those images. Let's not do that. And then the other thing too, one of the things I would love to see in the future is that sort of end-to-end thing based on what Jeff was doing with the runtime stuff with Kubescape, but being able to kind of like, it'd be great to be able to show, not that we didn't catch it at each level, but to show like there's no issues in like, or rather, hey, we catch it at source. Once we kind of move to the build, we catch it there. We catch it when you go to publish, we catch it in runtime. And again, the reason why you might only catch it at runtime is because there was no vulnerability yesterday. New vulnerability was disclosed. Hey, now we know that this is an issue. And the same thing kind of goes at each of those other layers of like, this was not a big issue when we went to go publish. When we went to go publish it, or sorry, when we built it, but now that we're actually looking at it in context of publishing and everything else, it's actually a big issue. And then one other thing, which is probably something we probably want to take a look at, there's a thing called OpenSSF baseline. We probably want to eventually support sort of parsing out baseline information. Most likely that will come through scorecard. And folks will want to know, do these projects follow baseline? If they do, at what level, and so on. And then we also probably want to think about who's making the claims that they're following it at baseline at a particular level, but that's a larger kind of thing. Baseline's going to be a big one.
Okay. Anything else? Any other topics that we didn't get to that we just realized we should talk about this month?
The only other thing, and it's not something that it's something that came up a little bit at VulnCon and is probably, oh, that's another thing. VulnCon was also last week. Gave a little talk on GUAC there as well. Couldn't give a demo because VulnCon only allows slides. Because of their whole setup. It was at a university where they're just like, the AV setup is very complicated, and so they're just like, just give us your slides. Stuff was there. The one thing that kind of got brought up and that now hit ahead was some of the CVE stuff. As I'm sure you've all been aware the past couple of days, there is a lot of discussion about in the future, what does maybe the distributed world of CVEs, SBOMs, et cetera, look like? Will there be, for example, discovery systems for SBOMs and CVEs and things like this, where it's no longer to be a single central authority for CVEs, but then in addition to that, a lot of folks are saying, right now you have SBOMs that are distributed, and the answer to where those SBOMs live is ask the vendor or ask the provider. Sometimes it's in a GitHub release. Sometimes it's behind a, an API that maybe Red Hat runs for their stuff, or maybe it's, a bunch of these other things. And so when it comes to the GUAC collector sorts of stuff is what might this look like in the future? Do we need to sort of reach out to the rest of the community to say, hey, look, we're hearing a lot of questions about, how do we pull this all in? Yep, and now there's also the EU vulnerability database, which is, funnily enough, they have explicitly said is not going to be compatible with the NVD. They're going to use a different set of things, which we just need to be prepared for. And yeah. So again,
Well,
we don't have to answer anything right now, but go ahead.
Say at least it keeps things interesting, right?
It's always interesting in yeah.
Is it the
All right, well-
same as this one? This is what I saw the other day, somebody mentioning, or this is the other. But yeah, you're right, it will be fun.
Alrighty. Well, if there are no other topics, then I think
Yeah.
we'll go ahead and get to the end. So as a reminder, we do have our weekly maintainer meetings Mondays, and the next community meeting will be the earliest it can possibly be because the month starts on a Thursday. So the third Thursday of the month is May 15th. So if you feel like this month's felt a little early in the month for you, we'll just wait till May. But beyond that, I'll see everyone in one of those meetings or in Slack. And thanks everyone for being here today.